The Rohingya genocide is not a simple crisis.
This is what genocide looks like.
In fact, the Myanmar military was engaged in a coordinated operation to attack.
The Rohingya, an ethnic group from Myanmar, have faced decades of discrimination and religious persecution. Ethnic cleansing and genocidal acts have sent the Rohingya fleeing from Myanmar to Bangladesh. But there is more than one story to this genocide. The media has portrayed the Rohingya genocide in many ways, but with a variety of narrative representations of the genocide, it can be difficult to define the truth. Media content can be passively consumed without realizing there's a narrative structure. Robert Entman's theory of framing explains that to frame is to select some aspects of a perceived reality. Essentially, framing creates a constructed perspective based on information that is highlighted or ignored and put together in a certain way to prove a point. Audiovisual productions, or videos, naturally have narrative arcs to them and are easy to manipulate into cohesive storylines with characters and conflicts. Video has become a medium that is widely used by media actors to present their narratives, especially in the case of the Rohingya genocide. So, who's telling the story of this genocide? The media entities of Human Rights Watch, the UN, Vice News, and Frontier Myanmar have produced audiovisual productions that have framed the genocide to tell their version of the story.
Human Rights Watch has been documenting...
Human Rights Watch is a non-profit that seeks to inform, educate, and protect vulnerable communities across the world. Human Rights Watch tells the story of the Rohingya genocide through the frame of an expert. Human Rights Watch chooses not to use voiceover narration to explain the Rohingya genocide, but uses the main character, Sky Wheeler, as the informer. The decision to have a lack of music and no voiceover creates a pretense of being the closest representation to reality. The natural sounds of the clips and the lecture style of Wheeler allow the audience to be immersed in a more natural environment. Human Rights Watch frames their videos to be realistic, which the audience can assume that the information is reliable and gives Wheeler an authoritative position to inform about the Rohingya genocide.
One of the ways that the ethnic cleansing campaign was conducted was through the use of rape. Sexual violence.
The structure of the video is formatted similarly to an essay where Wheeler states a piece of information, and then the video cuts to interview clips with Rohingya women. Wheeler illustrates her points with the Rohingya women's accounts as the evidence. Using the structure makes Wheeler a credible expert because the audience can see the tangible research she's collected.
The women and girls that I spoke to, they spoke to me because they want justice.
She emphasizes her trustworthiness because the Rohingya women chose to speak to her about their horrific experiences, which finalizes Wheeler's role as an expert in their suffering. This choice of framing could lead Human Rights Watch to have more influence in shaping policy because of the realistic and educational format of the video. The Rohingya genocide, through Human Rights Watch, becomes a story of an expert relaying findings of a human rights atrocity. The UN is an intergovernmental organization dedicated to peacekeeping and problem-solving humanity's greatest conflicts. The UN story of the Rohingya genocide is drawn through the frame of the hero. The video uses emotionally intense music that immediately draws the audience into the severity of the situation. There is no use of voiceover or an active spokesman. Instead, the UN uses subtitle text to explain the Rohingya genocide. The use of subtitle text can be associated with neutrality because text can't have intonation or be characterized. Using subtitle text to present facts allows the UN to be framed in an unbiased way. These aesthetic choices deepen the narrative of the UN as a hero in the genocide because the juxtaposition of the music and subtitle text creates a high-stake environment that sets the stage for their humanitarian acts to be the lifeline for the Rohingya. The UN establishes the Rohingya as the main character by using footage of mass groups in the refugee camps. Yet none of the Rohingya are given a voice. The only character who speaks in the video is the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres.
I call on the Myanmar authorities to suspend military action.
Since Guterres is the only person speaking in the video, it emphasizes his heroic call to action to end the genocide. This framing of Guterres in the video allows the audience to associate his character as the hero. The subtitle text mentions that UN organizations and partners are providing life-saving support. The syntax of the text emphasizes that the UN is doing a majority of the work to help the Rohingya. This specific phrasing of the UN's actions represents the solution to the conflict in the story of the Rohingya genocide, which reinforces the UN's position as the hero. Framing the Rohingya genocide with the hero's narrative allows the UN to further establish itself as an international savior and serves as a tool to promote their services as heroic.
The Rohingya are a Muslim minority.
Vice is a multimedia conglomerate that produces news in a variety of mediums. Vice's version of the Rohingya genocide is framed with the insider story. Vice uses eerie background music to set the tone of intensity.
Refugees come from Rakhine State, where the Rohingya population is concentrated.
However, Vice instead uses voiceover to tell the story of the Rohingya genocide. The use of voiceover creates the character of the narrator.
Daesh, bringing horror stories with them.
Third-person narrators aren't actively a part of the story, but narrators often have insight the main character doesn't. Vice uses voiceover because of the connotation that the narrator has an insider's perspective. The commanding yet informative tone of the voiceover, while using emotionally loaded language, draws the audience into an intimate version of the genocide. The main character in this genocide story is Abdur Rahman, a Rohingya man who fled from Myanmar because of military persecution. Vice presents a deeply emotional perspective by displaying the main character's pain as evidence of their insider's knowledge.
Is stationed on the border with Myanmar.
I was standing in
Another character present in the story is Lieutenant Manzuru Hassan, a Bangladesh border guard. Including another character's perspective demonstrates that the narrator is balanced in presenting different sides to the story, while also further expanding the narrative that Vice has exclusive access from multiple sources. The framing of the insider's perspective allows Vice to produce entertaining news that could increase their viewership by highlighting the emotional storyline of the Rohingya genocide. Frontier Myanmar is a privately owned local news agency. Frontier presents the story of the locals' perspective of the Rohingya genocide. Frontier doesn't use any music in the video and uses subtitle text to give background information. This combination allows the most neutral position because no emotional environment is being constructed. Frontier doesn't establish itself as a character, but through the use of subtitle text, the audience can assume that the facts being presented are true. The main characters are anti-Rohingya protesters. Both men that are interviewed deny the term Rohingya. The subtitle text uses specific syntax to define the beliefs of the protesters as their own, rather than representing Frontier. But at the same time, the subtitle text doesn't mention the ethnic cleansing happening in Myanmar and only briefly mentions the Mang Dao crackdown as the only reference to violence occurring. The term Rohingya isn't directly mentioned or acknowledged as a people group by the subtitle text, but is a reference to the main character's protest. This exclusion of information allows Frontier to publish news, but even in the assumed neutral stance, their story of the genocide is a censored version. The story Frontier has built excludes large events and the Rohingya themselves, which reflects the local politics of Myanmar. The Rohingya genocide ceases to exist in the narrative framing of the locals' perspective. The Rohingya genocide isn't just a story, but it's a crisis that's actively happening. All of these media actors have created different stories and narrative framing of the Rohingya genocide within audiovisual productions. Stories and narrative frames are unavoidable because storytelling is something that is innate to humanity. However, it is the audience's responsibility to be able to tell the difference between a narrative and truth.